Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Recovery Corner. I am your host, Candace Rose, and today is a special episode because it is the season 2 finale of Recovery Corner. And I also have to announce that this will be my final episode as host of Recovery Corner. I have been moving on to a different opportunity that I was given. And I'm so sad to leave YPR and Recovery Corner behind. But I'm really excited for the opportunity that I have and the opportunity that other folks may have in my departure. So while this is the finale of season 2, YPR is going to take a little break from the podcast and is looking to launch back up in the fall with a new host and probably a new format too. So don't lose touch. Definitely stay tuned to Recovery Corner. And we'll have some new and exciting content for you probably around National Recovery Month in September. So definitely stay tuned for that. And yeah, I just want to thank all my listeners for tuning in this last year and 2 seasons. So with that said, I'm really excited about this episode. Today at Recovery Corner, I have invited 2 of YPR's very own chapter leads. They are the Rainbow Recovery leaders, Miss Catherine Sherman and Amanda Lunsford. And these 2 are spearheading YPR's efforts to create more inclusive spaces of recovery for the LGBTQ plus community. So welcome to the show, you 2.
Thanks, Candace. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really happy to have you on the show and just talk more about YPR's Rainbow Recovery, but just in general, kind of like recovery through the lens of somebody in the LGBTQ plus community, because I know it's a little bit different experience than, someone like me may have had. So thank you so much for being open to being on the show. And with that, I think first, before we really dig into the topic, I want to get to know a little bit about the 2 of you. So Amanda, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about who you are today and what's been your experience with substance use disorder in the LGBTQ plus community.
Hey, everyone. I'm Amanda. I'm the YPR chapter lead in Santa Barbara, California. I've been with YPR for a couple of years now. And as Candace mentioned, helped start the Rainbow Recovery Initiative. Recovery and LGBTQ issues are both things that I'm very passionate about for both similar and different reasons. I'm 27 and I've been in recovery continuously for the last 5 years. But before that, I was in and out of jails, rehabs, sober livings, could never quite get recovery to really stick for me. So I know what that's like. I know what it's like to struggle with substance use. I know what it's like to struggle with, not being able to really get a hold on recovery. But I'm really grateful, these past 5 years that I've been able to really make that change and really invest in my own recovery and also find, a job where I can help other people do the same. And I can kind of get into this more a little bit later too, but I feel like my experience was a little bit interesting because I came out as bisexual after being in recovery for a couple of years. So I kind of experienced it on both sides. And, I think that hiding and denying that part of myself was one of the reasons why I used substances in the first place. So it's something that has a really special place in my heart. And I'm really excited that we get to, try to reach that community and provide safe spaces for that community with YPR.
Wow. I just learned so much about you that I didn't know. So thank you so much for sharing that part of yourself with us at Recovery Corner. And yeah, definitely, I've got some questions flaring up in my head, but we'll kind of, yeah, I think we'll get those addressed as we get into the rest of the show. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for spearheading this and being a part of it. Yeah. And with that, Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences.
Okay. So yeah, my name is Catherine, and I am the Fresno chapter lead. So I always knew I was interested in women from a very early age, like as early as maybe a child. And as I got older, I realized that my attraction to people didn't conform to the binary. So I could see myself being attracted to, and I have been attracted to people that do not, that are non-binary, that do not, that are transgender, that do not identify as like cisgender. And in the early years of navigating my sexuality, I was not in recovery. So most of the social settings where I found other people like me involved substances. All of my previous partners, like literally all of them, were like me, and they were involved in substances. So throughout my early and late adolescence, I can't say that my experiences were the healthiest, and especially growing up as like a bisexual, and then later like pansexual or queer. I haven't been able to really pin down my label, I guess, or something. But and a lot of my previous experiences and relationships, those connections stemmed from like a false sense of intimacy, where the commonality we shared was the substances or the substance that we used together. And as I started seeking recovery, it became really difficult to find a group that fit my needs. I had trouble finding therapists or recovery groups that I felt comfortable with as like being a person in a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And for instance, one of my previous therapists growing up assumed that my sexual identity was a result of childhood trauma, rather than merely being a part of like what makes me me. So with that, it was very invalidating to my like sexual orientation. And it made me question my identity. And then I had a lot of trouble finding friends that were a part of the community that were no longer using. So after I did get into recovery, I didn't know where the spaces were for people who were in recovery, right? That were also a part of the queer community. So a lot of the like queer spaces, like queer specific spaces, are like gay bars, and we don't have much outside of that, or at least I wasn't made aware of it. And yeah, so it was really difficult, especially in the early days of recovery for myself, figuring out like how to find new friends that weren't using. Because I craved that connection with other people that were like me, but I was having difficulty finding it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your experience too. And, for someone like myself, it's entering into recovery was a difficult decision, but so many less barriers for me, things that I never even considered. It's so easy for me to walk into a room and, find a room full of people that are like me, so I can't even really imagine what that's like when you're part of a community that's, a community that maybe historically has just been marginalized and pushed to the side. And so how difficult it is, because there's so much value in finding people with similar lived experiences, and how much more difficult that is for somebody that is part of this population. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important that people are aware of that challenge, and bring some, I don't know, just bring some education and awareness to that. And that really kind of leads nicely into my next question, which maybe was somewhat answered, but what, as the leaders with our YPR Rainbow Recovery, what really inspired you to create an LGBTQ plus specific space for YPR?
I can speak on that. For my own part, I think, I came out as bisexual, and I struggled at first. I didn't feel like I could talk about my sexuality with, in certain recovery circles. And I think with something as, vulnerable and deep and real as recovery, like, we want to feel safe, we want to feel seen, right? And I realized there weren't a lot of spaces where I could feel that comfortably, and I have become more comfortable with time. Part of that is finding that comfortability within myself, I think. But I think it opened my eyes to the ways that people that are new to recovery, or maybe, questioning their sexuality or questioning their gender identity, or, whatever it is, it may be really hard to do that in certain spaces. And a former San Francisco chapter lead of YPR, we were talking about this and talking about how the LGBTQ community is disproportionately affected by substance use. And we were like, it'd be really great if YPR could kind of help facilitate creating that safe space that is specifically for that community. Because there's something really powerful about, I think anyone that's in recovery knows that feeling of walking into a room and being like, these people get it, right? These people have been where I have been, and they can relate to me on a level that most other people can't. And I think for the LGBTQ community, there's kind of that added level of, okay, we also want people who kind of can understand some of my struggles around sexuality or gender. Like, there's another level there. And that can come from people who have lived experience. It can come from allies. It doesn't have to be people that are, gay, trans, etc. But even just, educated allies can help facilitate that space. But I think that was, our inspiration. Like, we really just wanted to provide that safe space and be that support.
Adding on to what Amanda said, I learned about something in my my undergrad, or my bachelor's degree. I majored in women's gender and sexuality studies, and something specific to what Amanda was saying made me think of intersectionality and how important it is as a concept, to look at the context of people's lives through an intersectional lens. Because as people in recovery, without those spaces that are safe and where we do feel seen, and that we have similar experiences, it can be very alienating. And in active addiction, you're already alienated. You're already stigmatized. So it adds that additional layer of stigmatization, of alienation, as a person who is not only seeking recovery, but they're also part of a group that is already kind of not the norm, right? And they're kind of ostracized within society. It's getting better, right? Like, the prejudice is getting better, but at the same time, we do see it's not, right? We see policies passed in different states all the time that like, don't say gay bill or something, right? Like, I can't remember if that was in Florida or what, but we see things like that, and it's hurtful. And so when we go into a space as people in recovery, we want to see that the people there respect our journeys and they understand them, and that we're not going to misspeak on someone's pronouns. And if somebody does misspeak there in those spaces, they are educated enough, like an educated ally, to own up to that mistake, right? And to take ownership over it, and to be accountable for misspeaking someone's pronouns, and also accepting that correction from the person. So I feel like that's really important in these spaces. And that was a part of why I wanted to join Rainbow Recovery, because somebody that is actually from my chapter, I haven't connected to them much, but they had said that some of the 12-step groups they were a part of, they identified as non-binary, and they didn't feel safe there as a result of being non-binary. Maybe they felt like microaggressions and things like that. And myself personally, I don't necessarily identify as non-binary. I feel very comfortable with like both masculine and feminine, and kind of like sometimes neither. I don't really know how I feel about gender within myself. So I guess I can kind of relate on that level, but hearing that from a chapter member, it really struck a chord with me, because I grew up not feeling accepted, right? Like by my family. I grew up like my mom would basically ground me just so I couldn't see my girlfriend. And, and it's like we have that cycle repeated in a different way, but it's still somewhat similar, where kind of you receive this subtle punishment for being different than the norm.
Yeah. To add on to that, something that I've noticed in 12-step recovery, and I have a lot of love and respect for 12-step recovery. That's where, I was introduced to recovery. But, their preamble that they read at the beginning of meetings says, we are a group of men and women. So it's like right off the bat, you're hearing this message of conform to these gender binaries, which actually I think the preamble just got officially changed to we are a group of people, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's awesome. I mean,
yeah,
glad to see
I'm really
that's
excited about it.
Progressing.
But then, we still see things like women's meetings and men's meetings. And, we see that all over, right? Like it's not just recovery or AA or anything like that. But I think it's definitely something that can make, non-binary people or, trans people like just feel maybe uncomfortable or out of place almost.
Right. Yeah. Not knowing, because if somebody is trans, like identifying as a woman and feels safe, would feel safe in a woman's meeting, but in the more traditional, I don't know what the right word is. And please, if I say anything wrong, please correct me. On the show, I would love for other people to hear me be corrected so they know. But yeah, I could totally understand the fear walking into there, not knowing if, the other women will be as accepting. This conversation, I don't know the best way to ask this, but I think for me, not everybody's like me. and I have this maybe naive perception that can't we all just get along, and like, can't we all, like, I don't necessarily want to see like separation, and be like siloed, and then it's just like isolating these different populations. But at the same time, I've been learning like there is benefit to this. So, like what, I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this. Like, why is it important to have these like specific spaces, like, versus just trying to encourage everybody to be more accepting and inclusive? Although, I think that there needs to be that too. Did I ask that right? I'm not.
No, that makes sense. I think it's some of both, right? I think like going back to the women's meetings and men's meetings, like I know a lot of women feel safer sharing in a women's meeting, right?
Mhm.
They also go to, kind of co-ed meetings or whatever you want to call it. So I think there's definitely space for both. There's definitely a need for the general kind of recovery community to maybe be more accepting and be more open, and maybe there needs to be more education and awareness around LGBTQ issues. But at the same time, while that is happening or until that happens, like there's, I think, still a need for, I don't want to say exclusive, but maybe more private spaces until it is safer, right? Or until maybe, someone feels safe enough and secure enough in their own identity and recovery to enter those spaces.
Right. Is there anything you'd add to that, Catherine?
Yeah, I completely agree with Amanda. And I also think it's important to note that, like, just because like some people are very accepting and open and like they're just so open and accepting of the LGBTQ plus community, but then there are others, right, that they are very against it, or they are they don't believe in like gender pronouns, and they don't believe in the binary or the non-binary. They're adamantly against these things, right? So having these safe spaces where you can go into it and you're not going to receive any sort of prejudice, it creates that safe space. And I've just from like different things I've heard in my own chapter, because I facilitate LGBTQ plus recovery meetings for Fresno State. And also I work with the LGBTQ plus EOC Resource Center in Fresno. And a lot of the people that I've encountered in this work, for instance, at meetings, sometimes I've had people that I've met that have never even been asked their pronouns, right? Like it's never even come up in conversation. And they are kind of taken back by the fact that in our meeting, like that's even a space where they could share, right? So I think that it's just really important because there's this awareness. And because there's this openness and the safety in that space where you can't find elsewhere, unfortunately, until things maybe are different, right? And then I've also seen others, one person in particular that I've met that it feels good as they were talking about it. It feels good to meet someone that is a part of the community, right? Like there's just this shared connection that's just like it happens immediately. And it's similar to like, being a person in recovery and going into a recovery space where you just kind of have this shared experience, this shared understanding of life, right? And that's kind of how it's been described by one of the chapter members that I have.
Yeah. Thanks for expanding on that. I think, some people don't understand. I mean, myself included, when all this was first brought to my attention, I'm like, but why? Like, that's all, like I said earlier, like, can we all just get along? But I mean, even I think as I think younger generations are are really going to like change. They're going to shift the paradigm around this. It seems like younger generations are more accepting and really like advocating for acceptance, which is so inspiring to see. But I mean, even, I don't know, even when we do find ourselves in a world where everybody is more accepting of different populations, like I still see the value in like sustaining, just like traditional 12-step meetings have their men and women spaces like for particular reasons, like, and those, men and women probably also go to the other meetings too, but having that space specific, because, well, I believe that a lot of people find themselves in substance use disorder because of trauma. But, these different populations, they've experienced different traumas that other people can't necessarily relate to, especially when we talk about families, we'll probably dig into this too as we get into some of the other questions I have for you guys. But yeah, I think it's so comforting when people have even those shared negative experiences that led them to there, so then they don't feel so like isolated and alone, and that feels even like safer to be able to open up to, because I have no idea what it's like to be in a body that feels like it isn't meant for me, like I was born as a woman and that's what I've identified as, but I know that that's not what a lot of people experience, but I can't relate to that on a level, let alone then icing on the cake is like entering into addiction and trying to manage that. So I really want people to like recognize the significance of having these specific spaces and like celebrating them. But then also like incorporating that into our just general recovery spaces too, so that everybody's welcome. So we talked a little bit about the recovery spaces, but backing up a little bit. And I think Amanda, you mentioned earlier, like this population is disproportionately affected by substance use disorder. So I want to explore that a little bit from your experience and as a person in recovery and as a person that's been in this recovery community. How do you see substance use disorder impacting this community differently?
Well, I did actually look up some data because we've looked it up in the past for Rainbow Recovery, and it was really interesting. And I will note, it can be kind of difficult to get exact data because the definition of the LGBTQ plus community can be very fluid. Not everyone is out, what's the definition of substance use? Like, there's a lot of variables there, right? But it's estimated that about 30% of the LGBTQ community struggles with substance use, and that's compared with only 9% of the general population.
Wow.
And I think it sadly makes sense. There's people in this community deal with homophobia, heterosexism, stigmas, exclusion, even violence. A lot of trans and LGBTQ youth are kicked out of their homes at a young age. And, a lot of that, it leads to depression, anxiety, shame, PTSD. And all of that can lead to using substances to cope. And, even in my experience, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I was hiding my sexuality for so long and denying that part of myself. And I think that bred a lot of shame and fear and just not being able to live authentically. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of reasons that I used substances, but I know that that was a big contributing factor. And I'm sure that's the case for other people as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like you grow up in a space where you're kind of told not to be yourself. So I could totally understand how wanting to, mind altering substances make us feel like not ourselves. So it's like a way to kind of escape that. What's the word I'm looking for? Just being torn between like wanting to be yourself, but not being accepted. So trying to like mask who you are under like substances or, yeah, I can only imagine what that would be like, especially for, young people, like kids, adolescents. You're really trying to like come into your own and learn who you are, yet you have the world against you telling you not to be who you are and to be less of yourself. It's difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah. And something Catherine mentioned earlier, too, a lot of LGBTQ spaces are centered around drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Gay bars or lesbian bars or going out to clubs and parties. And, I think that it is very normalized in a sense. And, thinking back to like back in the 70s and 80s, like there were specific bars like in New York, I'm thinking the Stonewall riots and stuff. There were specific bars that were places where trans and LGBTQ people could go and feel safe and accepted. So I think that can be another contributing factor. It's very normalized and has been very common for so long.
Yeah. And yeah, like as this conversation goes on too, I just want to like invite you both just like hop in whenever. But where was I? Yeah, so it's different. It's different. All I can relate to is my difficult experiences that sort of conditioned me towards substance use disorder. But I think that's something people need to note is the very different and difficult and even like politicized challenges that this population faces. Like it's not just like simple opinions in your community. Like these are your whole being is being challenged by the country in legislative action in a lot of cases. I think there's some states that are more progressive than others. I don't want to pick on any of those states that are less progressive, but I think a lot of us know some of the places. But yeah, so I have we talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but I don't know if we want to kind of backtrack a little bit, but I had a question lined up for like why it might be difficult for this community to access recovery support, but not just the community support, but even services. One of you mentioned earlier too, even just trying to find therapists. Like what's been your experience in the clinical sense of recovery services and how that might be different for this population?
I can speak to that. So I spoke a little bit on it earlier with my therapist, but that's like not the only time it happened. That was a recurring theme throughout all of my work with therapists. So like I had the one that kind of blamed my sexual identity and kind of like imposed their like religious beliefs on me, and then like blamed my sexual identity on childhood trauma involving another female, right? So that made it so that I didn't feel safe talking about my trauma, and then I also felt invalidated about my trauma, and then I also felt invalidated about like my gender identity, or not gender identity, sexual identity, and then I felt just I mean everything was very uncomfortable in that moment with trying to seek help and And then I kind of, I kind of was wary of therapists from that point on. And then like later, another therapist had basically said that she could like work with me on one thing, you know, which was like trauma involving like a guy, but she basically said that my moral compass knew that I shouldn't like be attracted to women. Yeah, and I was like
That's
14.
awful.
Yeah. She literally said that in the session. That was her feedback about what I was telling her. Because I think I had a girlfriend at the time, and I was talking about that too. And so my relationship also was abusive with the girl that I was dating. And then and then of course there were substances involved. And then like even with the way that people will treat like abuse happening in same-sex relationships, right? It'll be treated differently because you're with another woman, right? So I had even another person that was kind of like, well, you know, the girl that you're dating, she's not huge. Like, how couldn't you fight her off or whatever, right? But it's like abuse is abuse. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. And it's really, there are so many different things that you might not think about if you are heterosexual, and if you don't have like the experience of trying to find someone that you can talk to about all of these different intersections of who you are. Yeah, so that was kind of my experience in that.
Have you been able to find a therapist that can work with you? Really?
Not yet. I found like it's hard because I'll find one that will be able to work in one area really well, but then it won't, like they won't be as great in the other areas that I need to work on. But I think that's just that's less of speaking to like the therapist not being out there that can help me. I think it's more of those negative experiences kind of made me afraid to keep trying. Because after having so many experiences like that, where like my trauma was invalidated or my experience as like a queer woman was invalidated because of my trauma, like I didn't trust it anymore.
Man, that breaks my heart. And it makes me wonder though, if there's like networks out there, like networks of providers specific for, you know, different communities, like not just LGBTQ, but like people of color, people that have had these like different experiences that are not as, I don't want to say common, because I'm sure it's common that happens, but because like I was looking for therapists last year, and I would go to Psychology Today, and they all have bios, so at least I could like get a little sense of who they were. You know, I'm not super religious, so I'm not looking for any like spiritual counselor or like religious counselors, you know, and try to like steer away from that type of thing. But yeah, do you know of any resources like network platforms that help connect LGBTQ plus to appropriate providers that can be sensitive to this sort of thing?
I actually don't. So typically I'll go through resource centers that are more well-versed. So for instance, the LGBTQ plus resource center, I trust them in knowing providers because they work specifically with that population. But I believe they only have the location in Fresno, so I don't know if it would be applicable to other areas. And then I look in the bios as well, and I think that can be helpful. because
not complete though. It's,
not complete. Yeah.
it's not like they're going to just come out and say like, hey, we are very anti.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And then I try to pick up resources along the way with the work that I'm doing. So I'll try to find different like treatment programs that are specific to the LGBTQ plus community. But then it can also be hard to find treatment programs that are also affordable, right? Or that accept Medi-Cal, right? So I mean, because it's already hard enough to find treatment programs that are for low-income individuals, but having an availability of options, then that's just not there.
But even that's tough. I don't know if Medi-Cal's like Medicaid here in Colorado, but like they have the bar set pretty low for what you can qualify for. Like you pretty much either have to choose like a livable wage or medical care. And it's like, if you make, I think, more than $1,300 a month, like you no longer qualify in Colorado, which like if you're making $1,500 a month, like it's not like you're going to be able to just magically afford healthcare at that increase, so it's like that's, yeah, it's a great resource when people qualify, and I'm so glad it exists, but it does seem like they need to kind of raise that minimum or the maximum there so more people can qualify and actually get services.
Yeah, actually in California, they have something called Covered California. I don't know when that came about, but it makes insurance so much more affordable. I don't make a whole lot of money, but like I'm able to afford it. And also I have so many different options for providers. So it really,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah, you
have to put that in the show notes just for our California folks, because that's great information to have. Yeah, no, it's amazing. And then you get you get access to Anthem, Blue Cross, you get access to like what is it? Blue Shield of California, like some of these name brand, like big brands of insurance companies, and like legitimate coverage. So
wow. Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you for sharing about that, and and about the resource in Fresno. Anybody listening from Fresno, like the Resource Center, LGBTQ Resource Center, which I'd like to think like all communities have something similar to that. So wherever you live, you could probably Google search an LGBTQ plus Resource Center if you haven't already done that. And people there can probably help guide you in a good direction to find some providers, hopefully. But I feel like there should be an app for that, like a place where you can kind of go find providers and therapists or something, some sort of simplified network. Because it's so important that people feel safe, not only in a recovery community, but in a clinical, like with your therapist, like and it baffles me that the experiences that you have had, because I'm not a therapist. I worked as a peer recovery coach though with, so I had therapist colleagues, and from my understanding, like you don't bring any of your personal stuff into those sessions, like they need to be very objective.
You're not supposed to. I'm going for a master's in some sort of counseling. I haven't exactly decided yet. And yeah, from everything I've learned so far, you're not supposed to do that. And a lot of what I've seen in therapy sessions has been wrong.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's frustrating. Is there, I don't know, can you like report somebody for that?
Probably, but I wouldn't want to. I mean, really bad. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, it's not fun. I mean, I've worked in managerial roles. I don't like writing people up, but like, that's detrimental to your health, and not just you, but like other folks that might have had similar experiences. And it's completely inappropriate for somebody to bring their own personal agenda into a professional setting like that. So I implore anybody to have that has that experience to, make a report, and, not that that person necessarily shouldn't ever practice again, but they definitely should probably be required to take some training and not continue that behavior. I don't know, but yeah, because we got to say stuff sometimes in order to put an end to it. It might not do anything. I mean, it might go unheard, but it's definitely going to go unheard if we don't say anything. So I don't know. If that happens to you again, I implore you. I implore you to, complain.
Yeah, I'll think about it. I have a hard time with like speaking up sometimes. I think that's something I need to work on in therapy. So
yeah, I mean, advocate for yourself, and it's hard to do, especially, from your experiences, just being told not to be yourself. I don't know you that well, but I can imagine that there have been people challenging you and, not wanting you to speak up for yourself. So, but you are a strong, courageous person, and, I guess sometimes if you're like trying to encourage yourself to do it, it's kind of imagine like what's the worst thing that can happen, but what's the best thing that can happen, and maybe compare and contrast, and that might help like make it seem easier. If the best case scenario far outweighs the worst case scenario, then go for it. Swing for the fences.
I love that. Good advice.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I have a hard time speaking up for myself sometimes too. But through recovery, I've definitely learned to be a better self-advocate, and not everybody's going to like what I have to say, and they might disagree, and, they'll have feedback for me, and I'll take their feedback. And, if it's something I'm really passionate about, I'm not going to let it go. But I don't know. Sometimes it's just like learning how to have that right level. We don't want to like yell at each other. That never gets anywhere, but trying to have kind of like a calm discussion, even if the disagreement, I think it can be done calmly. So those
I think the hard part about it actually was that I was like a minor.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So because I most of the experiences happened with therapists that I had like when I was like a teenager.
Well, I mean, that brings up like a whole nother issue though, is that, there are teenagers, minors out there that are kind of coming to terms with their identities, where maybe their parents and their peers are not accepting, and then they go to therapy and they can't even get the validation from their therapist. So like that's something that needs to be brought to the forefront too, I think, is how do we help young people like find the support they need, because the support they get is probably very influenced by their parents. So if their parents have their own agenda and don't want to see their kids like follow through with this, I don't know the right way to say that, but
like a more progressive.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, how do young people, adolescents and minors like get the appropriate services that they need when they're sort of under their parent supervision, and maybe they're fortunate to have really accepting parents that want to get them connected to the right places. But I mean, I've heard the horror stories of some of those what are those camps called?
Conversion camps.
Yeah, the conversion camps. That's insanity. I don't, and like traumatizing and abusive. I don't know how I'm getting down this tangent, but like there are like really scary things out there that are just very anti-LGBTQ, to the point where they're so afraid of this how do I say this right? They're so afraid of the reality that their kids are experiencing with their gender identity. They're afraid it's going to hurt them, that they actually put them in harm's way just so that, they conform to these like binary genders. I'm probably not saying that right, but I think you guys are picking up what I'm laying down.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that also, it brings up the point of we need to be advocating not just for ourselves, but for other people, people who maybe can't advocate for themselves.
Right.
This was just making me think of, I have a friend who's a trans man, and he recently moved into a men's sober living home. And, he was really nervous about being in an all male environment because, in his experience, cisgender or heterosexual men have not been the most accepting or understanding of his gender. And, since being there, he's experienced some transphobia, some comments and kind of being excluded, and which is, obviously it makes me really sad. But I have another friend in the same house who is gay and non-binary, and they have been able to advocate for him and, kind of, I don't want to say protect him, but like, kind of speak out on their behalf and call out people who are acting in, transphobic ways. So I think, advocating can look different for everyone, right? That's just kind of a smaller scale example, but even just doing those little things of, pointing out homophobic or transphobic comments, it makes a big difference.
All right. Well, that starts to kind of allude to my next question too. Talk a little bit about the problems, and I don't think we're going to arrive at the exact solution or the end all solution to this, but I don't know, how can we make recovery more accessible and inviting to this population?
I think a big thing, which we've already touched on a little bit, but not using gender specific language. So, for example, changing men and women to people, or, creating kind of all-inclusive meetings. I think that's a good place to start. Sharing pronouns, as Catherine talked about. We had someone come to one of our first Rainbow Recovery meetings, and he got really emotional. Like, at the beginning of the meeting, we asked people to, introduce themselves and share their pronouns if they're comfortable. And a little ways into the meeting, he was getting really emotional. And then he shared, he was like, no one has ever asked me my pronouns before. Like, I've never been able to really speak them out loud or share them. And that was just such a powerful moment. It's like such a simple thing can have such a huge impact on someone. And, I think even like introducing ourselves, like using our pronouns, so not necessarily asking, but just kind of opening that door of, hey, these are my pronouns, and if you want to share yours, you are more than welcome. That can kind of be a good place to start, because people aren't always comfortable, just sharing their pronouns. But yeah, those are two things that I can think of. What do you have, Catherine?
I think, because I've heard a lot of similar things that you have, especially in that story you were sharing, Amanda. Kind of going back to, I think I said this earlier, but a lot of my chapter members that have been coming to the LGBTQ plus recovery meetings, they've never had the chance to say their pronouns, or they've never been asked. And that is like a really emotional moment. Or even I have some chapter members that, for instance, like as you were speaking about like housing, they will not disclose their pronouns because they're worried about, having some experience of microaggressions or like prejudice, discrimination as a result of it. So it's really really sad when you see that. Even, for instance, I know of, I haven't worked with her a lot, but there's a trans woman at the women's shelter that I work at. And from what I've heard from some of my other chapter members, she receives a lot of negative treatment from some of the clients that are there. And it's just, I think it's so important to have these spaces because they are, they're fit for people that are competent around the LGBTQ plus community, right? And they are sometimes by people, for people that are a part of this community, right? So like there's this shared knowledge of pronouns and even sometimes, we get to have the opportunity to educate other people that have no knowledge of the LGBTQ plus community. I have one chapter member that has like no connection to the LGBTQ plus community, but he's learned so much and he's so open to it from being a part of our queer meetings. So it's like he comes to them like every single week, and he's so supportive of everyone that's shared, like whether or not they're agender or they're non-binary. Like he's so supportive, and he is a cisgender straight, guy, and it's just incredible to see that. And I feel like these spaces that are specific to the LGBTQ plus community, because they're focused on competency around these identities, I think it really cultivates this competency in more people, right? And then they can continue to spread that knowledge further.
Yeah, I think education and awareness are huge. Like Candace, I appreciate you so much for being willing to, open this space and ask these questions. And, like you said earlier, like, correct me if I say anything that's, wrong or, offensive or anything like that. Like, that's huge. Just being open to learning and open to, hearing if someone says, hey, that was maybe offensive or that made me uncomfortable. Like being open to hearing that and, making those changes is so huge.
Right. I saw a thing a friend of mine posted on social the other day that I'd have to look at it. It had some tips on how to receive feedback when you're corrected with relation to like pronouns and gender identity. And it mentioned on this one pager not to apologize because it's, it's not the other person's job to make us feel better. Oh, the dog just pulled my computer. It's not the other person's job to make us feel better, and rather just like thanking people for the correction and helping us all become better educated. I mean, it's a new thing really within the last several years. It seems like that there's more attention and more work going into the direction of like gender identity and pronouns and making sure that everybody is welcome and accepted. So I think it's easy for people to get on the defense when somebody's like, you're wrong, but it's not, it needs to not be taken like, oh, you're wrong. It's just like, hey, this is new. We're all learning. So I'm just sharing knowledge with you. And so say thank you instead of, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think
love that. Sorry.
And I think, you're good. I think it's kind of, we've all been raised in a heteronormative society, right? Like that's the majority of the norm, the mainstream, whatever you want to call it. And on some level, we all have some internalized homophobia, I think. I know that I do. And it still comes out and I don't like it, but, I'm working to change it. But I think recognizing that is huge too. We can make mistakes and it doesn't mean that we're bad people or we're, not open-minded or accepting. We are a product of the society that we've grown up in. And I think as long as we're honestly doing the work to learn and change and grow. It's not something to feel ashamed about at all.
Catherine, are you going to say something too?
I don't really have anything to add. I agree.
Nice. Well, we are almost out of time, but I want to ask both of you. I got one last question. I want to know from your personal perspective, what does recovery mean to you?
I'll answer first. This feels like such a broad question. I'll try to keep it short though.
Means a lot of things. Depends on the day, right?
I think in the broadest sense, to me, recovery means freedom. It means being able to make choices that I know will help me and not hurt me. It means having a community of people around me that I know will accept me where I'm at and support me no matter what. It means not waking up miserable and exhausted every day and going to sleep desperate and hopeless every night. And it means learning to love myself fully and love the people around me better.
Beautiful answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love that. So recovery to me is holistic. So I don't think it started and ends with being in recovery for substances. I think it includes everything, right? Like trauma, because I feel like my substance use was a symptom of something deeper, of a deeper problem that resulted from trauma. So I feel like it was more of the symptom for me rather than like the actual diagnosis or cause. So I feel like looking at all of the pieces that have been hurt or broken, and then seeking recovery for all of those pieces is recovery for me.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
So true. I mean, there's a lot. It's not just like putting down the drink or the drug. There's a lot of digging that has to be done. And then like repotting. There's a lot to do. So, well, awesome. Thank you so much. I think this was a great episode that was eye-opening for a lot of people that may be unfamiliar, and hopefully folks that are part of this community enjoy this episode too. And, also we didn't spend a ton of time talking about Rainbow Recovery outside of the fact that the two of you spearhead that. Do you want to tell our audience where, like, how do they get involved with Rainbow Recovery YPR?
So I don't know the Facebook or Instagram by heart. Amanda, do you?
Yes, our Instagram is YPR_Rainbow Recovery. And I believe the Facebook group is under our YPR main page, under groups. It should be under there. Right. But YPR Rainbow Recovery for both.
Nice. And I'll make sure to link those in our show notes. So those of you listening should be able to just scroll down and click those links, find them on Facebook. I also believe if you navigate to the Young People in Recovery webpage, calendar of events, they'll find that your meeting, you host a meeting once a month on Mondays, the last Monday of the month?
Last Monday. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what time is that at?
3 p.m. PST and then 6 p.m. EST.
Awesome. And those are virtual. So no matter, these two are in California, but you could be in New York, you could be somewhere else in the world, and you can attend that meeting. So yeah, definitely if you're on social media, like and follow them on Facebook and Instagram, to keep up with what's going on and get plugged in. And I would love to see more like satellite rainbow recoveries pop up around the country. So if anybody's listening and wants to get a rainbow recovery chapter started in your community, let us know. You can email community@youngpeopleinrecovery.org, or just get connected to these two through the social media platforms we mentioned. But lovely. Before we sign out, is there anything else that you'd want to add, or maybe any other resources that might be helpful for people listening today?
So you can also find a lot of LGBTQ plus specific meetings on my Fresno Instagram. So it's YPR Fresno CA. That's just the handle. So you can find
awesome. I will plug that in the show notes too. So thank you for adding that.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Once again, I am your host, Candace Rose. And as I mentioned earlier, this is my final episode at Recovery Corner as I transition away from young people in recovery. Bittersweet. I really appreciate all the guests that have been on the show and everybody that's listened. And I'm really looking forward to when season 3 picks back up, hopefully in the fall. So I'm sure everybody will get notified of that when the time comes. But as always, here at YPR, we do recover and we are in your corner. Thank you for listening.